It begins in a world so quiet that even the wind seems afraid to breathe. A world where the sky feels heavier and the land beneath your feet is not soil but solid ancient ice. If someone from our time traveled back 20,000 years, the first shock would be the silence. No buzzing insects, no rustling leaves, no sound of human activity, only the endless groaning of ice sheets stretching across the horizon like frozen continents. This world appears alien, hostile, and unforgiving, yet it was the cradle where our species learned to survive. Everything we are today, our intelligence, our cooperation, our innovation, was shaped under the shadow of ice. Modern humans live in a tiny window of geological peace, a brief warm intermission called the Holocene, but this stable climate is not typical of Earth. For almost 3 million years, our planet has swung between glacial and warm phases with a rhythm so regular it's almost like a planetary heartbeat. These ice age cycles didn't just freeze landscapes, they sculpted continents, redirected oceans, evolved new species, erased others, and forced every living thing plants, animals, humans to adapt or die. And hidden behind this entire pattern is an elegant cosmic mechanism. Earth's orbit, tilt, and wobble subtly change the amount of sunlight reaching different parts of the planet. Tiny alterations spread over thousands of years combine into powerful forces that can cool or warm the entire globe. When this shift favors weaker northern summers, snow stops melting fully, and over centuries it piles into ice sheets kilometers thick. Eventually, these ice sheets grow so large that they create their own climate, cooling air, pushing storm tracks southward, and amplifying their own expansion. Planet Earth is then locked in deep glaciation, and the Age of Giants begins. It's easy to imagine an ice age as a frozen wasteland, but this is completely wrong. Beyond the massive ice sheets lay one of the richest ecosystems Earth has ever produced. It stretched from France across Siberia, across the land bridge of Beringia, down through Canada and far into the heart of North America. A vast, windswept steppe full of hardy grasses and herbs, capable of feeding millions of animals. In this cold, dry, open world, nature built giants of staggering size, mammoths with spiraling tusks, woolly rhinoceroses with massive shoulders built for plowing snow, ground sloths that could topple trees with a single push, and armored glyptodonts shaped like walking tanks. Predators were just as formidable. Saber-toothed cats, relying not on jaw strength but on enormous neck muscles, executed precise killing blows. Dire wolves hunted in packs huge enough to bring down bison. Short-faced bears, towering over any modern predator, patrolled the grasslands with a confidence no creature dared challenge. This was the world humans first walked into. We were not the dominant species. We were fragile, slow, desperately vulnerable. Creatures surviving at the mercy of an environment far stronger than us. And we were not even alone. Another kind of human, Neanderthals, had already mastered the art of living in cold Europe. They were muscular, barrel-chested, and brilliantly adapted to freezing winds. Their noses warmed icy air before it reached the lungs, and their stocky builds conserved heat like living furnaces. Their tools were sophisticated, their hunting tactics coordinated, their minds symbolic enough to bury their dead with care and decorate the world with pigments and ornaments. If you had met a Neanderthal face to face, you might have mistaken them for a distant cousin rather than a separate species. Yet even with such adaptations, the Ice Age was unforgiving. Seasons were unpredictable, storms brutal, resources unevenly distributed. Climate shifted in abrupt pulses, decades of warming followed by sudden deep freezes. Entire herds might migrate overnight, rivers could disappear beneath ice for centuries. Forests expanded and collapsed repeatedly as the climate seesawed. Every living thing had to move, change, or perish. And through all of this, humans sharpened their resilience. We learned to track animals across frozen plains, craft clothing from stitched hides, build shelters from bones and woolly mammoth tusks, and master fire in ways no other creature could. The cold didn't simply challenge us, it sculpted us. Around 20,000 years ago, the balance tipped once again. Earth's orbit leaned toward warmer northern summers. Snow began melting more completely each year. The ice sheets, those thousand-kilometer giants, began to weaken, at first slowly, then with dramatic acceleration. When glaciers collapse, they do not gently fade. They fracture, roar, and explode. Meltwater lakes the size of seas burst from behind ice dams and flooded continents. Sea levels rose so rapidly that coastlines drowned within centuries. Rivers carved new paths through freshly exposed land. Forests returned to regions barren for tens of thousands of years. Animals fled, migrated, or adapted. And humans followed every shift with hungry, desperate precision. But warming was a double-edged sword. The ecosystems that supported mammoths and other megafauna began to unravel. Grasslands shrank as forests expanded. Plants that had thrived in cold, dry air were replaced by shrubs and trees. The icy winds softened, wet climates returned. The mammoth steppe, the richest biome Earth had ever known, began to die. With it, the giants that defined the Ice Age faced shrinking habitats, and alongside this ecological pressure came another new force. Modern humans spreading rapidly with new hunting techniques, new weapons, and growing populations. As the climate warmed, humans adapted faster than any other species. We learned to fish along emerging coastlines, gathering shellfish by the thousands. We turned to smaller game, deer, rabbits, birds, and developed traps, nets, and new weapons. Designs. And somewhere in this shifting world, something revolutionary occurred. Humans began to plant seeds. The first villages appeared. The earliest granaries were built. Farming, an idea impossible in the unstable Ice Age, became viable. Climate stability allowed our ancestors to stay in one place long enough for crops to mature. This single shift would reshape the fate of the entire planet. The warming continued, pushing the world into a transformation unlike any seen in millions of years. New rivers formed where ice once dominated, tundras became forests, entire regions that were once frozen wastelands turned into fertile valleys. In these new environments, humans flourished, but the giants of the Ice Age did not. Their food sources vanished, their ranges collapsed, and with humans hunting even at low intensity, populations that had survived countless previous glacial cycles suddenly tipped toward extinction. One by one, the titans of the Ice Age disappeared. Yet before their final demise, before the mammoths vanished from mainland Eurasia and North America, before the giant ground sloths breathed their last in South America, before the woolly rhinos fell silent, there came an extraordinary moment. On a tiny, isolated island called Wrangel Island, a final surviving population of mammoths lived until just 4,000 years ago, long after the pyramids of Giza had already been built. Mammoths and ancient Egyptian scribes existed at the same time. Humanity had already begun constructing civilizations, while the last remnants of the Ice Age clung to life in the Arctic. This transition, from a frozen world of megafauna to the warm Holocene we know today, was one of the most dramatic climate shifts in Earth's history. It was not gradual or gentle. It was chaotic, violent, and world-reshaping. Humans, who had once been barely surviving, suddenly found themselves in a world bursting with new opportunities. With warmer temperatures, predictable rainfall, and stable seasons, people could plant, harvest, store, build, settle, expand, and imagine futures beyond simple survival. But beneath this new warmth lay the memory of ice. Every valley, every coastline, every soil layer carried the mark of glacial advance and retreat. Our species carries it too, in our bones, in our instincts, in our need for community, cooperation, and planning. Ice Age stress molded our brains. Ice Age migrations shaped our bodies. Ice Age climate swings forged our innovation. We are, in a very real sense, the children of an ancient frozen world. And the cycle that created all of this vast 100,000-year heartbeat, continues to run in the background even today. The question is whether it still matters, now that one species has gained the power to alter the climate faster than ice sheets ever could. That question, and the story of what came next after the ice retreated, forms the next chapter of this journey. The world after the ice began to melt did not transform overnight. It shifted like a living creature waking slowly from a deep and ancient sleep. Some regions thawed faster than others, revealing land so raw it looked newborn, scraped clean by glaciers and carved by rivers that had been compressed under ice for millennia. As the ice sheets retreated northward, they left behind scars, vast moraines, freshwater lakes, and new coastlines waiting for life to reclaim them. Humans followed these openings like a shadow. Wherever the ice withdrew, people moved in, filling the void with fire, tools, families, and stories. But the warming world was not automatically gentle or easy. It was unstable, moody, and unpredictable. As temperatures rose, giant meltwater lakes formed behind fragile ice dams, and when those dams burst, floods rushed across continents with a violence no living human had witnessed. Walls of water, 100 meters high, roared across plains, carving new valleys and drowning anything in their path. These devastating floods reshaped landscapes in days that would have otherwise taken thousands of years to erode. Our ancestors had to navigate a world in constant transformation, where old routes vanished overnight and new ones opened by surprise. Yet, even with these challenges, the general trend remained clear. The world was getting warmer, wetter, more stable. Forests crept northward. Grasslands gave way to woodlands. Rivers broadened and carried new nutrients across floodplains. Lakes teemed with fish, coastal zones expanded, and with every passing generation, humans adjusted their strategies, their lifestyles, their technologies. The massive herds of Ice Age megafauna began thinning out. Their decline was not immediate but eerily steady. Each decade, fewer mammoths roamed the plains. Each century, the once familiar silhouettes of woolly rhinos appeared less often on the horizon. Hunters who had relied on these giants for food, clothing, tools, and structures found themselves struggling as old certainties vanished. In this new world of shrinking, warming landscapes, the relationship between humans and megafauna became strained. Even small increases in hunting pressure, barely noticeable at first, accumulated. Species with slow reproduction simply couldn't keep up. The pressures of climate and predation intertwined like threads in a web tightening with each passing season. At the same time, new human innovations emerged, shaping what survival meant in a post-glacial world. Among the greatest breakthroughs was the ATL, a spear thrower that acted like an extension of the human arm, increasing both accuracy and velocity. Innovators would carve wood, bone, and antler into precise lever-like tools, attach hooks and grips, and transform an ordinary spear into a far more deadly projectile. These weapons allowed hunters to kill from safer distances, reducing risk during hunts of increasingly elusive prey. Later, in a moment that fundamentally altered human destiny, someone somewhere crafted the first bow. Thin strips of wood bent and bound with sinew gave birth to a weapon with unrivaled power for its size. Now a single hunter could stalk and kill small or medium-sized animals silently and repeatedly. The bow democratized hunting. It empowered the weak, the small, the young, and the old. With improved tools came new strategies. Humans began hunting smarter, not harder. They organized drives, luring or chasing animals toward natural traps, swamps, or cliffs. Groups worked with astonishing coordination. Signals, time movements, decoys, fire usage. These coordinated hunts left behind bone beds of hundreds of animals, evidence of mastery over nature that would have seemed impossible only millennia before. Human societies became more complex as cooperation became indispensable. Yet in many ways, the greatest revolution was not a weapon, but a shift in mindset. Instead of wandering endlessly in search of food, people began manipulating the environment itself. They burned patches of land to refresh vegetation and attract grazing animals. They cleared brush. They managed small territories with fire, tools, and knowledge handed down through generations. In doing so, they started becoming engineers of the landscape. Then came a remarkable experiment, one that would change the course of history more than any weapon ever could. Somewhere in a fertile crescent of land, stretching from modern-day Turkey through Syria, Israel, Iraq, and Iran, people began tending wild grains. They harvested them, they stored them. They noticed the seeds that fell near their camps sprouted the next season. Eventually, someone intentionally planted them. It was a small act, barely noticeable at the time, but it unlocked a future no one could imagine. Agriculture was born, not as an invention, but as a realization. The beginning was humble. A few cultivated patches, wild barley and einkorn wheat growing in tended plots, people protecting them from pests and scavengers. But with each passing generation, the knowledge deepened. They selected seeds from plants with larger grains, sturdier stalks, and better yields. Slowly, humans began reshaping plants just as the Ice Age had reshaped humans. The first domesticated crops emerged, foods that could not survive without people and people who could no longer live without these new foods. Permanent settlements followed. Families built structures meant to last, with walls of mud brick, branches, stone, and packed earth. Villages formed around fertile soil, springs, and rivers. People stored food long term for the first time, creating surpluses that changed everything about social life. Surplus meant security. Security meant stability. Stability meant population growth. But farming was hard, much harder than hunting. Fields needed tending, irrigation needed managing, soil needed understanding. People worked longer days and endured more physical stress. Their bodies show signs of wear and tear, arthritic joints, damaged vertebrae, repetitive strain. Early farmers were shorter, more prone to malnutrition, and more vulnerable to disease. Living close together in dense sedentary communities allowed pathogens to flourish. Waste contaminated water. Animal domestication introduced new viruses, bacteria, and parasites into human populations. The world that seemed so promising carried its own kind of danger. Still, farming persisted because it offered one thing hunting rarely could: predictability. The future became more manageable. Seasons felt purposeful. Land held value. Families planned ahead. The more people depended on cultivated land, the more deeply they committed to it. Permanent settlements became towns. Towns became centers for craft, trade, and culture. Over time, agriculture gave rise to specialization. Some people farmed, others built tools, others wove cloth, shaped pottery, hunted, fished, or became traders, priests, or chiefs. Society grew layered, structured, and increasingly complex. All of this was occurring while the world around these early communities continued evolving. The melting ice reshaped coastlines dramatically. Sea levels rose over 100 meters as vast ice sheets disintegrated. Entire land bridges drowned beneath the ocean, forever isolating continents. The land bridge between Siberia and Alaska disappeared beneath the Bering Strait. Britain separated from mainland Europe. Indonesia fragmented into thousands of islands. These changes isolated human groups, forcing distinct cultures to develop independently. The world became a mosaic of isolated civilizations, each shaped by its own environment, climate, and resources. Some regions flourished. The Middle East became a cradle of farming, with cattle, goats, wheat, and barley spreading rapidly. China saw the rise of rice cultivation. In the Americas, people domesticated maize, beans, squash, and eventually potatoes. Africa saw the domestication of sorghum, millet, and yams. Farming appeared independently because climate stability made it possible everywhere at once. Other regions remained dominated by hunter-gatherers who thrived without farming. In Australia, people continued to burn landscapes skillfully, maintaining ecosystems perfectly suited to their way of life. In Siberia, Arctic, and Northern Europe, herding reindeer or hunting marine mammals remained more effective than agriculture. In the deserts of Arabia and North Africa, herding livestock offered a better return than planting crops. Human societies diversified, not along a single path, but through countless strategies shaped by land, climate, and tradition. At the same time as forests expanded into former grasslands, humans who had once lived among giants found themselves face to face with a quieter, more compact world. The mammoths, mastodons, and woolly rhinos were now ghosts fading from memory. Stories about them lingered only as myths or cultural legends. Children heard tales of enormous beasts their ancestors once had hunted, creatures so large they shook the ground when they walked. Perhaps those stories were true or exaggerated, but they kept alive the memory of a vanished world. Meanwhile, the forests themselves became new arenas for human ingenuity. In wood-filled landscapes, people learned carpentry, built canoes, carved tools, raised wooden walls, and developed new forms of shelter. Fishing grew into a major food source, and river systems became highways for migration and trade. As wood replaced bone and stone in many tools, technology diversified dramatically. The world was warmer now, but not uniform. Some regions experienced rapid wetting, others faced sudden drying. Massive climate events continued shaping human societies. The Sahara, which we know today as a barren desert of endless sand, was once a green paradise full of lakes, rivers, hippos, and giraffes. Nomadic herders grazed cattle across its grasslands. Then, in a slow but relentless shift, the monsoon weakened and the Sahara dried. Entire populations were forced to migrate, many converging on the Nile Valley, leading indirectly to the rise of ancient Egypt. Civilization itself was often fueled by climate pressure. Elsewhere, valleys flooded, forcing people to relocate. Coasts disappeared beneath rising seas, pushing communities inland. But through each upheaval, humans adapted with a kind of resilience forged long ago in the ice. The memory of hardship ran deep, even if unconsciously. Our ancestors' brains had been wired for flexibility, learning, cooperation, and imagination, all qualities required for survival in an ever-changing world. But the true turning point in post-glacial humanity was not just farming or villages, it was culture. Symbolic thought exploded in every direction. People painted walls of caves with scenes rich in movement and emotion. They carved figurines representing gods, fertility, ancestors, or beauty. They created flutes, drums, and rhythmic tools to make music that echoed across valleys. They buried the dead with care, beads, tools, and symbolic artifacts. They crafted stories about creation, death, spirits, and the meaning of life. The world was no longer a place they merely lived in. It was a place they understood, shaped, and belonged to. With culture came identity. With identity came community. And with community came the early seeds of society as we know it. Humans were no longer just surviving, they were imagining. Yet, even as the Holocene warmed and stabilized, one question lingered silently in the background. Would the ice ever return? The planet's orbital cycles continued turning like gears in a cosmic machine. Eventually, under normal circumstances, the world should have begun cooling again. Glaciers should have returned. Ice sheets should have begun forming. But something was changing, a new variable that had never existed before. Humans, countless in number and increasingly technological, had begun influencing the climate itself. That part of the story comes later. For now, in the early chapters of the post-Ice Age world, humanity is still young, still learning, still adapting to a planet transforming beneath their feet. The giants are gone, the forests are rising, the rivers swell with meltwater, and humans are slowly, unknowingly, taking the first steps towards civilization. As humanity settled deeper into this warming world, entire regions began to pulse with new forms of life, movement, and experimentation. The retreating glaciers continued revealing land that felt untamed, land no ancestor had ever walked. Rivers carved fresh paths through valleys newly freed from ice, and these waterways became lifelines guiding human groups into territories rich with fish, fertile soil, and migrating herds. People built camps along river mouths where fresh water met the sea, collecting shellfish in such abundance that the discarded shells piled into massive mounds taller than houses. These middens were more than trash. They were the birthmarks of settled life, showing where generations lived and fed from the same waters. Seasons became rhythms instead of threats. People knew when the salmon would return, when the rains would fall, when the berries ripened, and when animals migrated. Predictability brought a new sense of time, a sense that the future could be anticipated instead of merely endured. And with every predictable cycle, humans found new ways to prepare, plan, and prosper. Across the continents, forests surged into lands that had once been frozen deserts. Pine, birch, oak, and countless other trees formed dense canopies. Birds called across these woods, their voices echoing like the world itself had begun singing again. But while the forests were beautiful, they posed challenges. Hunting became harder. Visibility declined. Animals hid within thickets and shadows. The openness of the Ice Age plains, where hunters could see mammoths miles away, was gone. Now a hunter had to rely on silence, patience, and stealth. New tools emerged, bows tuned for woodland ranges, traps crafted from bent saplings, snares woven from plant fibers, and pits disguised beneath leaves and branches. People began reading subtle signs, the bend of grass, the faintest hoof print, the broken twig that revealed an animal's passing. Tracking became an art form, a blend of instinct, knowledge, and experience. And while giant animals vanished, smaller species thrived. Deer, wild boar, rabbits, birds. Humans learned to diversify their diets, shifting from reliance on a few massive prey to a broader array of smaller opportunities. But the warm world brought something else. As people gathered in larger numbers, stories deepened, spiritual beliefs expanded, and rituals grew more elaborate. Every group developed myths explaining how the world thawed, why the sun rose, where the ancestors came from, and why the great beasts disappeared. Some believed the giants were punished by gods. Others said they retreated into the mountains or clouds. Some carved figurines shaped like long-tailed spirits or antlered gods, believing these beings governed the forests. Music became central to these rituals. Flutes made from hollow bird bones carried haunting melodies across valleys. Drums fashioned from stretched hide and wood thumped in sync with dancing feet. Fires cast shadows on cave walls where dancers moved like spirits, enacting stories older than memory. These gatherings strengthened communities. They reinforced identity, unity, belonging. People didn't just survive together. They celebrated, mourned, dreamed, and imagined together. As the millennia passed, some villages grew large enough to support dozens of families. Clay pots appeared shaped by hand and hardened by fire. Pottery changed everything. Food could be stored, carried, cooked differently, and protected from pests. Storage meant security. Security meant growth. Barley, wheat, rice, and millet fields expanded slowly but steadily. People dug irrigation trenches, channeling rivers to feed thirsty crops. They learned which soils were fertile, which needed resting, and which could be renewed with ash from burned fields. Some communities grew so productive that surpluses formed, piles of grain large enough to feed entire settlements through harsh seasons. And with surpluses came specialization. Not everyone needed to farm all day. Some crafted tools, some built houses, some tended herds, some watched the skies and tracked the movements of stars. Knowledge became a form of wealth. In the ancient Near East, as villages expanded, small ceremonial structures appeared. Central buildings where people met to discuss decisions, pray, or settle disputes. These early communal halls reveal something profound. Humans were no longer simply reacting to nature. They were organizing themselves around shared values, shared beliefs, and shared futures. Leadership emerged, not kings yet, but respected elders, skilled hunters, wise farmers, knowledgeable healers. And where leadership arose, so did hierarchy. Differences in wealth appeared. Some had larger fields, more livestock, or more storage pots. Others had less. Inequality began creeping into human society, like a shadow cast by the very stability people fought so hard to achieve. Hunter-gatherers still existed everywhere, often thriving more than early farmers. They criticized the farmers' hard labor and diseases, the crowded villages, the polluted water. Some farming villages suffered famine when crops failed, something hunter-gatherers rarely experienced because they relied on diverse food sources. For thousands of years, neither lifestyle dominated fully. The world was a patchwork, farmlands in fertile valleys, nomads on the steppes, fishers along coasts, forest hunters following game, and desert tribes migrating with sparse rains. These worlds sometimes coexisted peacefully and sometimes collided. When they collided, the farmers often had advantage in numbers, but the hunters had mobility and knowledge of wild lands. The push and pull between these lifeways shaped human history more than any single invention. Meanwhile, the world's climate continued its own slow transformation. In the early phases of this warm period, the Sahara was lush. Rivers flowed across its interior. Lakes covered regions now barren. People painted rock walls with images of giraffes, elephants, swimming humans, and cattle, a world overflowing with life. These paintings remain today, trapped in desert rock, silent testimonies of an Africa that no longer exists. Gradually, over centuries, the monsoons weakened. The rains grew unpredictable. Lakes evaporated. Grasslands became sand. People were forced to move, abandoning the Sahara's dying greenlands. Many migrated toward the Nile, creating population pressures that helped spark some of humanity's earliest large-scale societies. Others moved westward or southward, carrying with them the memories of a vanished paradise. Far to the north, Europe transformed as well. Glaciers that once towered kilometers high now existed only in isolated remnants. The great rivers that once roared with glacial melt slowed, became stable. Forests covered lands where mammoths once roamed. People carved wooden houses, built dugout canoes to navigate vast river systems, and created trade networks stretching hundreds of kilometers. Flint tools traveled from France to Germany, from Poland to the Baltics. Shell beads from the Mediterranean found their way inland. Amber from northern forests became treasured. Trade wasn't just commerce, It was connection. Ideas diffused across landscapes, seeds of crops, styles of pottery, methods of fishing, rituals, songs, and stories traveled with people and objects. Across Asia, landscapes changed dramatically. In China's river valleys, people cultivated rice in swampy fields, shaping water like a resource instead of an obstacle. Terraces emerged on hillsides, catching precious runoff and creating new farming zones where none existed naturally. Some groups domesticated pigs and chickens, developing new relationships with animals that once fled from humans but now lived alongside them. Further north, in the Siberian forests and steppes, the cold remained harsher, the winters brutal, but people adapted beautifully. They domesticated reindeer, following them across snowy plains. They used bone, sinew, and fur with unmatched skill, crafting clothing that could withstand temperatures far below freezing. These Arctic cultures preserved many Ice Age traditions long after the mammoths disappeared. In the Americas, societies flourished in diverse environments. Some lived along coasts, gathering shellfish and hunting sea mammals. Others ventured into dense forests filled with edible plants and abundant game. Farther south, in what is now Mexico, the first domesticated maize appeared, a tiny, modest grain that looked nothing like modern corn. Through generations of selection and cultivation, people transformed it into a staple capable of feeding thousands. Domestication was a slow revolution, but a revolution nonetheless. With every passing millennium, human influence over plants and animals grew deeper. And behind all of this, silently guiding every step, the climate remained unusually stable. For the first time in hundreds of thousands of years, the world was not whipsawed between freezing and thawing. The Holocene flatlined into warmth. Seasons repeated predictably. Rainfall patterns stabilized. This stability shaped humanity far more than most people realize. When climate is predictable, culture can flourish. When weather is known, agriculture can thrive. When temperatures remain stable, cities can rise. Civilization requires stability, like plants require sunlight. The stability also shaped human imagination. People watched the skies with new curiosity, noticing patterns in the stars. They tracked lunar cycles, solar paths, solstices, and equinoxes. Early astronomy emerged not from scientific curiosity alone, but from the needs of farming, knowing when to plant, when rivers would flood, when seasons shifted. All depended on understanding the heavens. The sky became not just a canvas of stars, but a calendar, a compass, a library. But even with all this stability, the natural world still carried the power to shock. Sudden droughts struck irrigation-dependent villages. Unexpected storms shattered coastal settlements. Rivers shifted their courses, destroying fields. Volcanic eruptions spread ash across continents. Every disaster forced people to reconsider their place in the world. Yet through every setback, human resilience prevailed. As societies expanded and grew more complex, new problems emerged. Conflicts over land, competition for water, disputes over leadership, wealth inequality, and cultural tensions. While small hunter-gatherer bands typically resolved disagreements through mobility, leaving or dividing settled life made such solutions difficult. Walls, fields, and granaries tied people to place. Conflict became more common. Early warfare appeared. Raids for resources, disputes over land, retaliations for past wrongs. Spears once used for hunting were now used for defense and attack. Settlements built walls and ditches. Some communities fell, others grew. Millennia passed in these cycles of growth, collapse, migration, innovation, and transformation. Humanity's footprint expanded across every continent except Antarctica. As people harnessed fire, plants, animals, tools, and landscapes, they became the dominant ecological force on Earth. The megafauna were gone, forests bent to human will, grasslands burned for pasture, rivers diverted for irrigation. Without understanding it, humans were becoming shapers of climate, soil, and ecosystems. Yet all of this remained only the beginning. In the deep background, the great cycles of Earth, the orbital rhythms that had governed climate for millions of years, continued turning silently. Under normal circumstances, a new glaciation would eventually begin. The world should have started cooling. Snow should have accumulated in the far north. Ice sheets should have slowly grown. But something new had entered the system. Humans were burning wood, later coal, and eventually oil and gas. Over thousands of years at first, and then explosively in the last few centuries, carbon dioxide levels began rising. The climate cycle that once ruled Earth without opposition now had competition. But that part of the story belongs to the future. In this chapter of humanity, as the last memory of the Ice Age faded and civilization slowly emerged, the world was still young, warm, vibrant, and full of potential. Humanity stood not at the end of a journey but at the threshold of everything yet to come. As communities grew and generations layered upon one another, the world entered a phase where human intention began shaping landscapes more visibly than the slow pulse of natural forces. Villages that once consisted of scattered huts gradually merged into dense clusters, and those clusters evolved into the first hints of towns, places where smoke from 100 hearths rose into the sky in soft spirals, carrying with it the scents of grain, burned wood, and cooking meat. The people who lived in these early towns felt a new sensation, something unfamiliar to their ancestors, the experience of belonging to a place rather than merely passing through it. Roots began forming in the soil beneath their feet, not just in the crops they planted, but in their identity, their memories, and their hopes. These early settlements soon discovered that life in close quarters demanded new forms of cooperation and new rules. Someone had to decide where fields were planted, how water was divided, how disputes were settled, who protected the town from outside threats. Leadership became necessity. In many places, the strongest or most cunning took power. In others, respected elders guided decisions with calm deliberation. And in still others, spiritual leaders, shamans, priests, or dream interpreters claimed divine guidance as their authority. However authority formed, one truth was universal. Power concentrated because stability required it, and that concentration began shaping societies in ways the Ice Age world had never seen. The invention of storage fundamentally transformed the flow of resources. Grain that lasted through winter, nuts kept dry in clay vessels, dried fish packed in woven baskets. These surpluses acted like time capsules of nourishment, freeing people from the endless search for daily food. But they created something else as well: wealth. For the first time in human history, some individuals began owning more than others. Those who guarded the stores, who managed the granaries, who controlled the distribution of resources, these people quietly shifted from providers into rulers. Wealth created hierarchy. Long before kingdoms existed, and inequality seeped into the fabric of society like dye soaking into cloth. Yet life flourished. Children played in dust-filled courtyards, their laughter echoing between mud-brick walls. Women ground grain on stone slabs, the rhythmic scraping forming the heartbeat of the village. Men crafted tools, flaked stone into razor-sharp blades, shaped bones into needles, bent wood into bows. Music filled the evenings, drums that echoed deep into the land, flutes whispering melodies that blended with the call of night insects, and the soft hum of voices chanting stories older than the settlements themselves. Night skies were clearer than any we know today. Stars shimmered like spilled jewels across velvet blackness, and people watched them with reverent awe. They tracked constellations, understood the moon's phases, and noticed patterns between the heavens and the seasons. This celestial awareness seeded the earliest forms of astronomy. To them, the sky was not mystery, but memory. A map passed down in stories, a calendar written in light. As generations passed, these settlements expanded. Fields stretched farther from the town's edge. Herds of domesticated goats, sheep, and cattle grazed on rolling hills. People began clearing forests, burning trees to open land for farming. Fire became a tool of transformation, reshaping ecosystems and driving species into new patterns. Rivers were diverted. Canals were dug by hand, their trenches carrying precious water from distant springs to thirsty fields. Every change left a footprint, a signature written into nature itself. Humans were no longer minor players in Earth's story. They were beginning to rewrite the script. But stability brought vulnerabilities. When drought struck, it threatened everyone at once. When rains failed for multiple years, crops withered, rivers shrank, and hunger crept into communities like a stalking predator. Entire settlements collapsed in the face of prolonged droughts. Families abandoned their homes, leaving behind broken pots, empty granaries, and cracked earth. They migrated toward greener lands, often encountering other groups who had also fled failing territories. Disputes over land became more frequent. Stone spearheads once used for hunting now embedded themselves in human skulls and rib cages. When scarcity touched the land, conflict followed. Still, progress continued its steady climb. Pottery expanded into artistry, painted spirals, geometric shapes, animal motifs. Clay vessels carried symbolism and identity, marking different cultures across continents. Village squares developed open areas where artisans displayed wares. Beads carved from bone, clay dolls, woven baskets, obsidian blades, and shell ornaments traded from distant coasts. Trade networks blossomed like vines stretching across landscapes. In some regions, materials traveled hundreds of kilometers. Ideas traveled even farther. In the Fertile Crescent, the earliest large settlements began showing signs of urban life, rectangular houses aligned in rows, with narrow pathways winding between them. Communal buildings stood larger than the rest, places where decisions were made, rituals performed, grain stored, and disputes resolved. People no longer lived only for survival. They lived for structure, purpose, and shared identity. They believed in gods tied to sun, rain, fertility, or the earth itself. Small altars appeared inside homes. Figurines symbolizing divine figures were placed near hearths or doorways. Medicines were refined from herbs, roots, and minerals. Burial traditions became elaborate, with bodies laid carefully, sometimes surrounded by beads, animal bones, or ochre pigments. As society's complexity grew, the first hints of writing emerged, not as literature, not as poetry, but as necessity. Clay tablets recorded grain counts, trade agreements, land ownership, and temple offerings. Marks scratched on clay were the seeds of written language. Once humans began recording information outside their minds, memory expanded beyond the limitations of individuals. Knowledge became durable, transferable, and accumulative. This was the beginning of human history's documented era, a shift that separated prehistoric silence from the written voice of civilization. Meanwhile, far from the early cities, vast regions continued flourishing with different cultures. In Europe, newly forested landscapes shimmered with life. People hunted deer, boar, and birds using finely crafted bows. They fished in rivers teeming with salmon. Lakeside settlements emerged, built on stilts over shallow waters, protected from predators and rival groups. Boats carved from single tree trunks glided across lakes, connecting communities scattered across the forests. Art survived here too. Intricate carvings on antlers, decorative pottery, painted rocks, and burial mounds filled with goods that honored the dead. Across Asia, rivers became arteries of civilization. In China's Yangtze Basin, rice paddies spread like mirrors catching the sky. Farmers learned to control standing water to nourish rice crops that fed growing populations. In northern China, millet fields rippled in golden waves under the sun. The people built walled villages, developed early bronze tools, and domesticated pigs and chickens. Their rituals incorporated ancestor worship and reverence for spirits tied to nature. Ceremonies involved drums, incense, and offerings to ensure harmony between the living and the dead. In the Americas, immense diversity persisted. Along the coast, shell mounds grew for miles. Inland, communities cultivated squash, beans, chili peppers, and early varieties of maize. Hunters followed bison herds across vast plains. Some groups built semi-subterranean homes to withstand winter cold, while others crafted lightweight shelters for mobility. Trade moved obsidian, shells, pigments, and crafted ornaments across thousands of kilometers. The foundations of future civilizations formed quietly and steadily, but beneath all this human activity, a subtle shift took place, one that no ancient person could see, though they felt its consequences. As agriculture expanded, forests burned. As herds grew, grasslands wore thin. As populations rose, the land carried more burden than ever. Human impact, still small compared to modern times, began accumulating. Soil hardened under constant use. Rivers clogged with sediment. Wild species retreated, and the world's climate, stable but sensitive, began responding to these faint pressures. Yet for those living during the Holocene quiet Middle Ages, life felt abundant. It felt predictable. It felt blessed. Festivals marked solstices and harvests. Children grew up hearing stories of ancestors who survived cold worlds filled with giant beasts. Those tales felt mythical now, like legends rather than memories of a real past. People saw mammoth bones and believed they belonged to ancient dragons or giants, never connecting them with their own ancestors' prey. The Ice Age faded from human consciousness, preserved only in art, fossils, and a few lingering myths. The world continued warming gradually. Sea levels rose and drowned ancient coastlines, burying countless early settlements beneath the waves where modern divers sometimes find remnants of stone tools or hearths. The Mediterranean filled, swallowing lowlands. The Black Sea expanded, flooding villages in a catastrophic event some later cultures remembered as a great flood. Islands formed where mountains once connected. Humans adapted again and again, moving with the changing world like water filling new spaces. And all the while, human society kept accelerating. Tools grew sharper, weapons deadlier, houses sturdier, trade networks longer, rituals deeper. Some settlements grew into towns, and those towns grew into early cities bustling with thousands of inhabitants. These cities became magnets for ideas. People from different regions met, traded, argued, learned, and mixed cultures. Temples rose. Massive stone structures began forming. Priests, rulers, and elites claimed divine favor. Farmers worked fields to pay taxes. Craftspeople devoted entire lives to pottery, weaving, metalwork, carpentry. Human society was no longer simply surviving, it was transforming. Even as life improved for many, fragmentation persisted. Some groups rejected farming entirely, seeing it as confinement. They remained hunters, herders, fishers, or seasonal nomads. Others adapted partially, farming during the warm seasons but traveling in winter. Human diversity and lifestyle remained one of the species' greatest strengths. Flexibility shaped survival. Although giant animals were gone, humans filled the ecological void with innovation. As centuries layered into millennia, civilizations rose and fell in different corners of the world. Empires emerged from fertile valleys. Kings and queens ruled cities of stone. Warriors marched across plains, ships crossed seas. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering advanced rapidly. Humanity's collective brain expanded across generations, each building upon the lessons of the last. And all the while the climate held steady, warm enough to support agriculture, stable enough to grow civilization. Yet even in this era of flourishing, nature reminded humanity of its power. Massive volcanic eruptions dimmed the sky. Earthquakes destroyed cities, floods wiped out harvests, droughts cracked the earth, plagues spread through trade routes, civilization rose, stumbled, rebuilt, expanded, collapsed, and rose again. Resilience became as essential as innovation. Still, nothing prepared humanity for the final twist in its long story with climate. For as humans farmed, burned forests, raised animals, mined metals, and later burned fossil fuels, something subtle began shifting. The atmosphere itself. The air carried more carbon, more heat, more change. Without knowing it, humans began nudging the climate system out of its natural rhythm, pushing against a cycle that had shaped Earth for millions of years. But that part of the story belongs to a different era. For now, in this narrative moment, this threshold between ancient memory and recorded history, humanity stood triumphant, fragile, curious, and unstoppable. The Ice Age had sculpted them. The Holocene nourished them, and the future waited silently for the choices that would determine everything that came next. As centuries unfolded and humanity settled deeper into the rhythms of the Holocene, the world became a place where ideas spread faster than rivers, and cultures grew richer than the soils that fed them. People who once measured time by the migration of herds now followed calendars carved into stone, calculated by stars tracked with astonishing accuracy. The human mind, sharpened by generations of adaptation, began weaving patterns into everything. Patterns in the sky, in animal behavior, in the cycle of seasons, and eventually in the forces that shape society itself. Life no longer felt like a struggle against the unknown. It became a quest for mastery over it. In fertile river valleys, early cities pulsed with energy. Smoke lifted from rooftop hearths and curled upward like soft gray serpents. Narrow streets swarmed with vendors calling out prices in rhythmic chants, children weaving between pottery stalls, goats bleating as they were herded towards small enclosures, and scribes hunched over clay tablets, marking symbols that turned thought into permanence. These cities became worlds unto themselves, dense, emotional, chaotic, creative, and alive. People from distant regions gathered there to trade obsidian blades, fine textiles, beads made from shells carried across deserts, and spices gathered from distant mountains. Every trade carried a story, every story carried a lesson, every lesson carried a spark that ignited the fire of human progress. Rulers emerged who believed themselves chosen by gods. Priests interpreted the movements of stars as messages. Farmers obeyed seasonal rituals to ensure harvest. Engineers carved canals through stone-hard earth to direct water into fields, turning barren plains into swells of golden grain. The world was reshaped by intention, not by accident. Temples rose as reminders of human devotion, massive structures requiring thousands of hands working in unity. In their shadows, markets flourished and homes clustered tightly together. Life became urban, and with it came new problems: overcrowding, competition, disease, but also new solutions, innovations, and bonds. Even beyond the great urban centers, life blossomed across continents in countless unique ways. In Africa, herders guided cattle across vast grasslands, singing songs that echoed across the savannas, melodies carried down through generations. In the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, communities built homes on stilts to escape flooding rivers, fishing with woven traps that glimmered like silver nets beneath the sun. In the northern forests of Europe, people crafted long wooden boats that skimmed across lakes, connecting far-off villages through trade routes etched into waterways. In the Pacific, explorers navigated open ocean using nothing but the stars, the wind, the shape of waves, and the flight patterns of seabirds. Humanity's ingenuity flourished in every corner of the world, yet the more humanity grew, the more it encountered the limits of its environment. Forests near settlements disappeared, replaced by fields and grazing land. Animals moved away or declined in number. Rivers that once flowed freely became burdened by diversion. People began noticing patterns: years when rains failed, harvest shrank, livestock died, and hunger crept into every home like a silent visitor. These hardships carved resilience into human memory. Many communities developed rituals to appease gods they believed controlled sky and earth. Others found more practical answers, inventing irrigation systems, grain storage techniques, drought-resistant crops, or migration strategies that ensured survival. Still, not every group adapted equally. Some civilizations grew so large that their success became a trap. Cities that once thrived on fertile land found themselves choking on their own expansion. When drought arrived and food dwindled, entire regions collapsed. Populations scattered. Knowledge was lost. The ruins left behind, crumbling walls, broken pottery, scattered tools, stood as silent warnings that progress without balance leads to decline. Nature never spoke, yet its message echoed clearly. Everything in excess carries a cost. Far across the world in the Americas, civilizations emerged with breathtaking creativity. The ancestors of future empires cultivated maize until it evolved from a small wild grass into the golden crop that would feed millions. They built ceremonial mounds larger than the pyramids of Giza, their earthen layers silently recording generations of devotion. They mapped the stars with accuracy rivaling old-world astronomers, built roads stretching thousands of kilometers, and crafted terrace systems carved into mountainsides that transformed steep slopes into productive farmland. Life flourished with remarkable diversity and ingenuity, but no matter how different their cultures, tools, or landscapes, all humans shared the same underlying challenge: working with the climate that shaped their destiny. The Holocene climate remained warm, stable, and forgiving, but its subtleties directed human history like invisible hands. When monsoons strengthened, societies expanded. When rains retreated, civilizations faltered. Entire migrations were triggered by tiny shifts in the Earth's systems. Without knowing it, people were responding to remnants of the 100,000-year cycle, echoes of glacial power, softened but not forgotten. Meanwhile, more than just societies were evolving. Minds were evolving too. Human psychology changed as groups grew larger. Where small tribes relied on intimacy, cities required systems. laws, punishments, contracts, and codes. Writing expanded from record-keeping into storytelling, poetry, myth, prophecy, and philosophy. People looked beyond mere survival and asked deeper questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What exists beyond death? What forces shape the world? These questions birthed entire schools of thought, some spiritual, some practical, some radically innovative. Metalworking marked another turning point. The discovery that fire could transform rock into gleaming copper, bronze, and eventually iron altered everything. Tools became sharper, durable, efficient. Farmers plowed land deeper. Builders carved stone with greater precision. Warriors wielded weapons that changed the balance of power. Empires rose around metal as surely as they rose around rivers. The world grew more connected, more competitive, and more interdependent. But progress always came with shadows. As societies grew, inequality widened. Some people controlled land, food, soldiers, and knowledge. Others worked the fields, built the monuments, carried the goods, and bore the burdens. Slavery emerged, sometimes accepted as natural, sometimes resisted but rarely eliminated. Hierarchies solidified. Yet even among these divides, humanity continued striving for meaning and improvement. Through all these centuries, climate remained the backdrop, steady enough to nurture civilization, yet dynamic enough to shape its turning points. When drought struck Mesopotamia, cities fell. When monsoons retreated in the Indus Valley, its great settlements emptied. When the Sahara dried, migrations fed the birth of Egypt. When El Niño cycles shifted, entire coastal communities in the Americas vanished. Climate was the silent architect of history. Still, humans rarely understood this connection. They credited gods, fate, or misfortune. But in eyes, truth, they were dancing to rhythms written long before their ancestors even walked upright. The Earth's systems moved with a slow, deep heartbeat measured in millennia, a breath so vast and ancient that no early human could ever perceive it. As human populations expanded into tens of millions, agriculture spread across nearly every fertile region on Earth. Complex states formed, maintaining order through armies, laws, and bureaucracies. Trade networks stretched across continents. Silk moved from China to Rome. Gold traveled from Africa to Europe. Spices crossed deserts and oceans. Ideas moved even faster. Religions, mathematics, medicine, engineering, and philosophy leapt between cultures and waves of inspiration. Humans, once mere witnesses to nature, now reshaped it on purpose. They diverted rivers, terraced mountains, drained wetlands, carved roads through forests, and built cities that glowed under torchlight at night. Forests that had stood for thousands of years fell to axes. Grasslands became farmland, wetlands dried, animals fled, adapted, or vanished. The world hummed with human activity. Even so, nature remained powerful enough to reset human arrogance. Great floods arrived without warning. Earthquakes toppled cities that took centuries to build. Volcanoes blotted out the sun for months. Plagues swept through trade routes, sending empires stumbling into collapse. Time and again, humanity was reminded that it was clever, but not invincible. And then came the technological spark that changed everything. In a series of gradual steps, humans learned to harness the energy stored in fossil fuels, coal, then oil, then gas. Machines replaced muscle, factories replaced workshops, railways replaced caravans, ships powered by steam replaced those powered by wind. Populations exploded, cities grew dense and towering, the world shrank as travel became faster and communication nearly instantaneous. But with this new power came an invisible shift, one humanity did not notice at first. Every furnace that burned coal, every engine that consumed oil, every factory that belched smoke into the sky added tiny increments of carbon into the atmosphere. One spark at a time, the balance of the Holocene began to shift. The world warmed, subtly at first, then more noticeably. Glaciers shrank, weather patterns drifted, oceans warmed and expanded, forests burned more easily, species struggled to adapt. By the time humans realized what was happening, they had already altered the planet more than any natural force had in thousands of years. They had taken control of the climate without intending to, becoming the first species in Earth's history capable of overpowering the ancient Ice Age cycle. The cycle that sculpted their bodies, guided their migrations, and forged their civilizations was weakening in the face of human industry. As the 20th and 21st centuries unfolded, scientific understanding skyrocketed. Satellites orbited Earth, measuring temperature, ice, clouds, oceans, and atmospheric gases with staggering precision. Climate models reconstructed the past and projected the future. Ice cores extracted from Greenland and Antarctica were examined like scrolls of ancient memory, revealing tens of thousands of years of climatic rhythms. Scientists understood more clearly than ever how delicate, interconnected, and vulnerable the climate system truly was. And this revelation led to a profound realization. The next chapter in Earth's climate story would not be written by orbital cycles, volcanic eruptions, or slow geological changes. It would be written by humanity. Even now, the world stands at a crossroads. The climate is shifting rapidly, ecosystems are straining, and societies must decide whether to mitigate the changes or struggle through their consequences. The future will not resemble the past, yet the qualities that allowed humans to survive ice ages, adaptability, innovation, cooperation, remain their greatest hope. This is the moment where ancient cycles and modern choices meet. The Ice Age shaped humanity. Civilization shaped the planet. Now humanity must decide what shape the future will take, not just for itself, but for every species sharing the world. Humanity entered a new era with a confidence that bordered on destiny. The world felt conquerable, its mountains scalable, its oceans navigable, its winds and rivers harnessable. Knowledge, once scattered in isolated pockets, began flowing freely across continents. People no longer wondered if they could reshape their environment. They wondered how far they could push the boundaries of possibility. And with each passing century, this ambition grew, fed by discoveries, inventions, and an ever-deepening belief that humans were no longer just inhabitants of Earth, but its rightful stewards. Civilizations that arose during the Classical Age refined governance, philosophy, mathematics, and architecture to extraordinary heights. Cities like Athens, Rome, Alexandria, Chang'an, Carthage, and Pataliputra pulsed with debate, trade, scholarship, and ambition. Streets bustled with merchants, soldiers, scholars, engineers, and farmers. Theaters echoed with laughter and sorrow. Libraries filled with scrolls and tablets preserved the accumulated understanding of generations. Roads stretched further, armies marched faster, ships traveled farther. Empires rose and fell in sweeping arcs, each leaving behind new advancements and new scars. As centuries passed, humanity's footprint deepened. Farming became more efficient as irrigation expanded and tools improved. Terraces climbed mountainsides, turning steep slopes into vibrant agricultural zones. Wetlands drained into cropland. Vast forests thinned as wood-fueled furnaces, workshops, and war machines. Where wild animals once roamed freely, livestock now grazed in predictable herds. Wolves, lions, and other predators retreated as human settlements expanded. Every year, the line dividing wilderness from civilization moved a little farther outward. Even as humans conquered landscapes, climate quietly shaped the fate of nations. A few degrees of cooling triggered famines that toppled dynasties. Volcanic eruptions darkened skies, altering growing seasons. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire, the expansion of Mongol territories, the spread of ancient religions, and the migrations of countless peoples, all were influenced not just by war and leadership, but by subtle shifts in temperature, rainfall, and wind patterns. Humans rarely recognize these forces in the moment. They blame divine anger, unlucky omens, or political incompetence. Yet behind every crisis, nature moved with slow, deliberate force, reminding humanity that it was powerful, but still part of a larger system. As centuries progressed, curiosity drove new revolutions. Compasses guided ships across oceans, connecting worlds that had evolved in isolation for tens of thousands of years. The exchange of crops, animals, ideas, and technologies between continents reshaped global populations. Potatoes from the Andes fed Europe. Wheat and rice spread across the Americas. Horses returned to North America centuries after their ancestors vanished. Gunpowder, printing, mathematics, and navigation crossed oceans and rewrote the fate of civilizations. But these connections also carried disease, pathogens that swept through populations with devastating speed. Entire regions changed forever as viruses shattered societies unprepared for them. The world became unified not just through trade and discovery, but through shared vulnerability. The scientific revolution deepened humanity's understanding of nature. Telescopes extended vision to distant stars. Microscopes revealed invisible worlds teeming with life. Laws of motion, gravity, energy, electricity, and thermodynamics emerged. Humans no longer saw the world as governed only by gods or fate. They saw it as an intricate machine with understandable rules. This shift in perspective unleashed even greater ambition. The Industrial Revolution arrived like a storm. Coal-fired engines churned, railways crossed continents, factories sprouted from landscapes like metal forests. Smoke poured from chimneys, staining skies with the signature of modern progress. Population surged as medicine improved. Cities grew dense and loud, glowing at night with thousands of lamps. The world moved faster than ever before, driven by innovations that reshaped every aspect of life. Yet beneath the triumph ran an unseen current, billions of tons of carbon released into the atmosphere year after year. A process that once took millions of years, burying organic carbon underground, was being undone in mere generations. The atmosphere thickened almost imperceptibly, trapping more heat. Winters softened, glaciers retreated, storms intensified. But in the early decades of industry, few noticed. It was a faint whisper in the background of booming progress. Advances in science revealed just how fragile Earth's balance truly was. Paleoclimate researchers discovered ancient climate records locked in ice cores, tree rings, coral reefs, and sediments. These records told a story spanning hundreds of thousands of years, a story of cycles, stability, disruption, and resilience. They showed unmistakably that the climate was sensitive to small changes, that tipping points existed, and that feedback loops could amplify minor shifts into major transformations. These discoveries illuminated a profound truth. The stability of the Holocene, the era that nurtured agriculture, cities, and civilization, was rare and precious. It was a calm window in Earth's turbulent climate history, a window that humanity assumed would remain open forever. But the window was closing and humans were the ones shutting it. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the signs were undeniable. Sea ice shrank, oceans absorbed heat and became more acidic, coral reefs bleached white, heat waves shattered temperature records, wildfires consumed forests with unprecedented intensity, permafrost thawed and released ancient methane. Species migrated uphill or toward the poles as their habitats warmed beyond survival limits. The planet, once dominated by natural rhythms, now responded increasingly to human-driven forces. Still, humanity pushed forward. Technology advanced exponentially. Computers shrank from room-sized machines to devices fitting in pockets. Satellites mapped Earth with precision. Communications spanned continents instantly. Medical breakthroughs saved lives once lost to simple infections. Renewable energy emerged. For a moment it seemed humanity stood on the edge of solving every challenge, including climate change. But progress was uneven. Nations disagreed, industries resisted, and societies struggled with competing priorities. Some people denied the change, others feared it, and still others fought fiercely to reverse it. The world entered a race between innovation and inertia, between cooperation and conflict, between what humanity could do and what humanity would do. Yet amid these challenges, one truth became impossible to ignore. The decisions made now would reverberate for centuries, just as the Ice Age cycles had shaped the deep past. Humanity was no longer reacting to climate, it was driving it. The old rules no longer applied. For the first time, the climate's next phase would be written not by orbital cycles or geological shifts, but by human choices. This realization sparked movements across the globe. Young voices demanded action. Scientists worked tirelessly to refine predictions and solutions. Engineers built cleaner energy systems. Communities reimagined transportation, agriculture, and city design. Nations debated carbon limits, renewable targets, and global agreements. Progress was uneven, but hope persisted. Humanity had survived ice ages, megafaunal extinctions, volcanic winters, pandemics, and countless upheavals. It evolved from stone tools to space exploration in a blink of geological time. Adaptation was written into its bones. Innovation pulsed through its history. The same traits that carried humans through the unforgiving Pleistocene were now needed again, but on a scale unlike anything before. Amid this struggle, the Earth continued changing in ways subtle and dramatic. Some glaciers retreated so far they revealed land unseen for 120,000 years. New lakes formed where ice had melted away. Coastal cities began preparing for rising seas. Storms intensified, reshaping coastlines and human expectations alike. Farmers shifted planting calendars. Species vanished before many were even discovered. Coral reefs faded like memories of another world. But alongside these losses emerged resilience. Forests were restored in unexpected places. Renewable energy expanded. Cities adapted with green roofs, permeable streets, and coastal defenses. People learned that climate action was not merely about sacrifice, it also brought cleaner air, healthier communities, and new economic opportunities. Even in the face of uncertainty, humanity continued dreaming and building. Space exploration reached new heights. Artificial intelligence transformed industries. Global collaboration increased in areas unimaginable centuries earlier. Humans learned, slowly but surely, that they were not separate from the Earth. They were part of it, bound to its rhythms, dependent on its health, and responsible for its future. The story of humanity had become a dialogue between past and future. Every scientific discovery carried echoes of ancient ice cores. Every debate about energy policy echoed the struggles of early humans adapting to glacial winds. Every technological breakthrough mirrored the turning points when stone tools gave way to metals, when horses gave way to engines, when fire gave way to electricity. And the question that lingered, the question that tied all of history together, remained the same. Would humanity adapt once again? Would it rise to this new challenge as it had countless times before? Would it choose a path shaped by reason, cooperation, and foresight, or one shaped by conflict, denial, and fragmentation? Across the world, the answer was still unfolding. But one thing was certain. Humanity had reached the moment where the Ice Age cycle ended and the Human Age began. The climate no longer dictated the future. Humans did. And the imprint they left, the choices they made, would echo through time just as powerfully as the great glaciers once carved valleys into ancient stone. This era, with all its uncertainty, danger, brilliance, and potential, would define not just the next century, but tens of thousands of years. For the first time, humans stood at the helm of Earth's destiny, and history waited to see what they would choose. Civilization did not expand in a straight rising line. It moved like a tide, surging forward with brilliance and collapsing backward with violence and silence. Empires flourished for centuries, convinced their rule was eternal, only to crumble when climate, disease, conflict, or internal decay swept through like a quiet shadow. The world humans inherited after the Ice Age was abundant, but abundance created rivalry, ambition, and struggle. Kingdoms rose in fertile valleys where agriculture flourished, often forgetting how fragile that fertility truly was. Beneath the foundations of their cities lay the memory of the Ice Age, layers of soil built by winds that once roared across mammoth steppes, rivers guided by meltwater channels carved beneath glaciers, landscapes sculpted by forces far older than human ambition. And while rulers celebrated their conquests and built monuments to their victories, nature continued shifting around them, indifferent to the illusions of permanence. In the Near East, the earliest great civilizations depended on rivers whose behavior was anything but predictable. Floods could nourish farmland with rich silt or destroy entire villages in a single season. Droughts could last years, pushing populations to migrate or fight for resources. The people living in these early cities did not always know why the climate changed, but they knew the consequences intimately. Famines toppled dynasties, storms reshaped coastlines. Years of drought stretched into decades, pushing entire cultures to the brink. Some adapted with innovation, irrigation canals, grain storage, new crops, new trade routes. Others collapsed, leaving behind ruins swallowed by sand and time. Farther east, ancient China faced its own cycles of prosperity and disaster. High rainfall periods expanded rice cultivation, population boomed, and cities prospered. Then the climate swung, rivers dried, harvests failed, and empires fractured. In the Americas, the Maya flourished during warm, wet centuries and built towering cities deep in the jungle. When droughts intensified, reservoirs dried, and forests retreated. The Maya didn't vanish. They adapted, dispersed, restructured, but their great urban centers fell silent. Similarly, in Africa, shifting monsoons pushed the Sahara through dramatic transformations. From a green savanna full of lakes, hippos, and human settlements, to the vast desert we know today. People adapted by moving south or toward the Nile, fueling the rise of new cultures and trade networks. Through each of these events, humans learned a pattern they did not fully understand but sensed in their bones. Climate could determine the fate of nations, and yet, as centuries passed, humanity grew bolder, more confident in its ability to withstand or outsmart nature. Philosophers debated ethics and metaphysics, unaware that their ideas were often shaped by the stability or instability of their climate. Traders traveled thousands of kilometers, carrying not just spices and metals, but stories, technologies, and myths. Kings claimed divine authority, never realizing that their success often depended on a few fortunate decades of good harvests. Even the great religions of the world emerged from environments shaped by climate, regions where survival demanded community, cooperation, and faith. But beneath the surface of human progress lay a truth waiting to be discovered. Earth's climate had a history far older and far more dramatic than any civilization could imagine. That history was locked in places untouched by time. Ice cores in Greenland and Antarctica, layers of sediment on the ocean floor, tree rings in ancient forests, coral skeletons in warm seas. When scientists finally learned how to read these records, they uncovered a story that revealed both the fragility and resilience of life on Earth. They saw patterns of warming and cooling, of rapid shifts and long stable phases. They saw the fingerprints of ancient volcanoes, cosmic events, ocean circulations, and orbital cycles. And they saw something else, something unprecedented. The recent rise in temperature and carbon dioxide levels had no parallel in hundreds of thousands of years. The natural cycles that once controlled Earth's climate were being surpassed by a new force, humanity itself. Yet even when the scientific evidence became overwhelming, the world struggled to respond. Societies were complex, driven by economics, politics, culture, and immediate needs. Climate change moved slowly compared to election cycles. Its impacts were uneven. Some regions faced floods while others faced droughts. Some countries prospered, others suffered. People living in coastal cities saw the ocean rising inch by inch, creeping toward streets that once seemed eternal. Country after country built defenses, seawalls, dikes, pumping systems, while others relocated entire towns inland. Farmers shifted planting seasons, fishermen chased species moving toward colder waters. Firefighters battled record-breaking wildfires, and millions faced heat waves unlike anything the Holocene had produced. Even as the world wrestled with these changes, technology surged forward at incredible speed. Renewable energy became cheaper, more efficient, and more widespread. Solar panels spread across rooftops, deserts, and floating platforms. Wind turbines rose like silent guardians on coastlines and plains. Batteries improved. Electric vehicles replaced combustion engines. Scientists experimented with carbon removal techniques, artificial photosynthesis, advanced fusion, and climate modeling so accurate that it could foresee decades of environmental shifts. Humanity stood on the brink of a transformation as significant as the dawn of agriculture, but it required cooperation on a global scale. The irony of the moment echoed across every field of science. Humans, shaped by ice, now held the power to shape the ice in return. The same species that once cowered in the shadows of glaciers now had satellites mapping every meltwater stream, drones measuring atmospheric carbon, and supercomputers simulating the planet's future. The question was no longer whether humans could understand the climate, it was whether they could act fast enough, united enough, and boldly enough to preserve the stable world that allowed civilization to exist at all. Yet amidst the rising challenges, humanity showed remarkable resilience. When storms destroyed coastal towns, communities rebuilt stronger and smarter. When heat waves overwhelmed cities, architects designed buildings that cooled naturally. When drought struck farmlands, researchers developed crops that could survive with less water or thrive in saltier soils. People planted billions of trees, restored forests, and revitalized wetlands. Across the world, movements emerged demanding clean air, clean water, and sustainable energy. Young people took to the streets, refusing to inherit a world damaged beyond repair. Investors poured billions into green technologies. Countries formed alliances not for war but for climate solutions. Humanity was fragmented in many ways but united in one, the recognition that its future was tied to the planet's stability. Still, progress was uneven. Some regions prospered, while others suffered devastating losses. Some governments planned for the next century, Others struggled with the next month. Some industries embraced transformation, others resisted fiercely. And as the planet continued to warm, tipping points loomed. Ice sheets approached thresholds beyond which their collapse would be irreversible. Rainforests risked drying into savannas. Coral reefs neared extinction. The ocean circulation that stabilized much of Earth's climate showed signs of weakening. Humanity faced a narrow window, one shaped by decisions made in boardrooms, parliaments, laboratories, and everyday homes. But the story of humans had never been a story of certainty. It had been a story of adaptation, a species that survived saber-toothed predators, volcanic winters, continental droughts, and the brutal cold of the Ice Age was not a species destined for failure. If anything, the trials of the past forged a capability for problem solving unmatched in the natural world. Fire, agriculture, metal, writing, medicine, industry, electricity, computers. Every leap came when humanity stood at the edge of challenge. Now it faced the greatest challenge of all, protecting the planetary stability that made all those leaps possible. Even as the world grappled with climate, humanity reached farther outward. Telescopes captured images of galaxies billions of years old. Rovers searched for signs of ancient life on Mars. Probes ventured to asteroids that carried the building blocks of the early solar system. Some scientists even imagined terraforming distant worlds. Ironic, given humanity was still learning how not to unintentionally terraform its own. Space exploration revealed a profound truth. Earth was rare, a fragile oasis in a cold, hostile cosmos, a planet whose climate, biology, and geological history formed a masterpiece of balance. And slowly, this realization seeped into the public consciousness. People began to see Earth not as a backdrop, but as a partner in humanity's story, an ally that had sheltered countless generations, nurtured civilizations, and offered a home unlike any other. This shift in perspective changed everything. Protecting the planet was no longer seen as an obstacle to progress, it was recognized as the foundation of progress. Yet even in this moment of awakening, the ancient cycles continued beneath humanity's influence. Earth still orbited the sun with its gentle wobble. The tilt of its axis still shifted slowly. Its orbit still elongated and tightened over millennia. The 100,000-year rhythm that once commanded the advance and retreat of ice still played its silent music. But now the orchestra had a new conductor. The forces that once dwarfed human influence now competed with human-driven warming. Scientists debated whether another ice age would ever come. If carbon dioxide remained elevated, the next glaciation could be delayed by tens of thousands of years, or canceled entirely. Humanity had become a geological force, powerful enough to alter the planet's future on timescales normally ruled by celestial mechanics. This responsibility hung heavy over the world, but it also offered clarity. Humanity was no longer reacting to Earth's changes. It was shaping them. Every innovation in clean energy, every protected forest, every new policy or invention, every educational breakthrough became part of a global effort to steer the planet toward stability. And though the task was monumental, it was not hopeless. The same ingenuity that allowed humans to paint the walls of caves with stories of mammoths and spirits now allowed them to map global carbon flux with satellites. The same cooperation that helped tribes survive glacial winters now connected nations in climate agreements spanning continents. Humanity, once scattered bands tracking herds across frozen plains, had become a species capable of planetary stewardship. But the outcome was still unwritten. Some futures glimmered with restored ecosystems, stable climates, thriving biodiversity, and sustainable cities powered by clean energy. Others depicted chaos, displacement, collapsing agriculture, vanishing coastlines, and irreversible tipping points. Which path the world would take depended not on nature's cycles but on humanity's choices. At this moment in history, humanity stood on a threshold as significant as the end of the Ice Age. The last time such a transition occurred, the world transformed from frozen steppes to fertile valleys, from scattered bands of hunter-gatherers to the first farmers. Now the world faced another transition, one that would determine whether future generations inherited a thriving planet or a wounded one. Humanity could not return to the simplicity of the past, but it could honor the lessons of that past, that survival required adaptation, cooperation, and foresight. As the climate continued to change, new technologies emerged that pushed the boundaries of imagination. Advanced carbon capture systems mimicked the way ancient forests absorbed atmospheric carbon, Artificial intelligence optimized energy grids, transportation networks, and agricultural systems. Biotechnology developed crops resilient to extreme heat and drought. Cities redesigned themselves around green corridors, electric transit, and self-sustaining architecture. The world began to see climate action not as a burden, but as an opportunity, an engine for innovation. Yet, for all the progress, humanity remained one global family with uneven burdens. Island nations watched their shores erode. Arctic communities witnessed the land and ice of their ancestors vanish. Farmers in drought-stricken regions struggled. Migrants sought refuge as deserts expanded or storms intensified. Climate justice became a defining issue of the era. How to ensure that those who contributed least to the crisis were not the ones suffering most. And slowly, the world began to understand that climate change was not merely an environmental issue, it was a human one, touching every part of life: health, security, economy, culture, identity. Still, hope persisted. Humans found meaning not just in surviving, but in protecting. Grassroots movements grew in power. Restored forests began to reseed biodiversity. Rivers once clogged with pollution ran clear again. Slowly, painfully, unevenly, the world began shifting toward a new paradigm, one where humanity sought harmony with the planet, not dominance over it. And as this transformation unfolded, the story of the Ice Age remained a guiding light. It reminded humanity where it came from. It revealed how fragile life could be. It showed how quickly climates could change. It demonstrated that giants could fall and new species could rise. It taught that no ecosystem was permanent, no species guaranteed survival, no climate stable forever. The Ice Age was both a warning and a source of strength. Human beings had walked through frozen continents, hunted megafauna, crossed land bridges, survived volcanic winters, adapted to every corner of the planet, built civilizations in deserts and jungles, sailed across oceans, and now looked to the stars. This was not a species destined for oblivion. This was a species shaped by adversity and capable of reshaping its world. The path ahead was uncertain, but so was every chapter that came before it. And as the world stood at this crossroads, one truth echoed across history. Humanity had never backed down from a challenge worthy of its potential. The same spirit that carried our ancestors across ice-covered continents now carried their descendants into a future they would have never imagined. Humanity's story continued unfolding in a world that was both familiar and rapidly changing. The more people learned about the Earth, the more they realized how interconnected everything truly was. A drought in one region affected food prices in another. A wildfire in one continent altered weather patterns in another. A single melting glacier contributed to rising seas that touched every coastline. The entire planet behaved like a single breathing organism, its oceans circulating like blood, its forests exhaling oxygen like lungs, its atmosphere shifting like a pulse responding to every influence, natural or human. The ancient Earth that once moved on slow geological rhythms now responded to the actions of billions of humans acting within decades. Humanity had become a global force, yet still struggled to see itself as one unified species with one shared destiny. In the busiest cities, towering skyscrapers stood as symbols of human ambition, but beneath their steel and glass lay foundations sharpened by centuries of climate stability. In the countryside, farmers woke before dawn, tending to soils that had been shaped by the melting of ancient glaciers. Fishermen cast their nets into oceans whose currents had been sculpted by millennia of ice age circulation patterns. Herders guided their animals across plains formed by winds that once blew over frozen mammoth steppes. Everywhere humans lived, they walked on landscapes molded by the distant power of ice. Yet now the ice retreated at a pace no generation had witnessed. The poles, once symbols of eternal cold, warmed as if waking from a long slumber. Glaciers shrank into ribbons of white. Permafrost that had sealed away ancient organisms began to thaw, releasing secrets thousands of years old. But even as nature shifted, humans adapted in ways that blended the ancient with the modern. Indigenous Arctic peoples redefined their relationship with the land, using drones and GPS to track herds while preserving centuries-old knowledge. Desert communities used solar power to thrive in some of the harshest climates. Engineers found inspiration in termite mounds to design buildings that cooled naturally. Scientists studied the migration patterns of birds to develop better wind turbine placements. Human innovation merged with the lessons of nature, revealing that the path forward was not to dominate the Earth, but to learn from it. Even political landscapes began to reflect the urgency of the climate era. Leaders gathered at global summits, delivering promises to reduce emissions, though some commitments faltered when confronted by economic pressures. Some nations prioritized renewable energy, building vast solar farms that shimmered in deserts like metallic seas. Others struggled, constrained by limited resources or internal conflict. And yet, a global understanding slowly crystallized. No country could shield itself alone. Climate borders did not obey maps. Heat waves crossed nations without visas. Storms struck with no regard for politics. Rising seas respected no sovereignty. The earth was shared, and its future would be shared as well. In labs around the world, scientists pushed frontiers once thought impossible. They developed advanced batteries capable of storing renewable energy for entire cities. They engineered materials that absorb carbon dioxide from the air. Some explored ways to mimic ancient plants, creating artificial leaves that captured sunlight and created clean fuel. Geneticists studied species that survived extreme heat or drought, hoping to unlock their resilience. Researchers drilled into Antarctic ice to uncover climate archives stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, windows into eras when mammoths roamed and humans had not yet mastered fire. Each discovery carried a message. Earth had changed before, violently and dramatically, and it would change again. The difference now was that humans understood the stakes. Despite this knowledge, humanity remained divided at times, torn between urgency and hesitation. Some argued that the planet had always changed and always would, minimizing the severity of the moment. Others believed technological salvation would arrive in time, dismissing the need for lifestyle changes. Many feared the economic cost of transitioning to sustainable systems, while others feared the human cost of failing to transition. These conflicts played out in newsrooms, parliaments, social media platforms, and dinner tables. The debate was no longer about whether the world was changing, but how fast, how deeply, and how humanity should respond. Yet, in the midst of disagreement, something remarkable persisted: hope. It appeared in unexpected places: children planting trees along riverbanks, volunteers cleaning beaches, farmers experimenting with ancient grains that thrived in dry conditions, urban neighborhoods creating community gardens that cooled streets and fed families. Hope appeared in new environmental laws, green innovation hubs, and youth activism sweeping through cities. Hope appeared in scientists who, despite setbacks, believed that every problem had a solution waiting to be discovered. Throughout history, hope had been humanity's greatest renewable resource, and now it fueled a new chapter, one focused on restoration. Restoration became more than a concept, it became a movement. People planted forests where they had been cut down. Rivers once forced into concrete channels were allowed to flow naturally again. Wetlands drained for construction were restored to support birds, fish, and flood control. Coral nurseries grew in underwater farms before being transplanted to reefs. Species once considered lost were reintroduced to landscapes where their ancestors lived before the megafaunal extinction. Biologists worked tirelessly to protect the last remaining individuals of endangered species. Slowly, ecosystems began to show signs of healing. Not everywhere and not fast enough, but it was a beginning. Meanwhile, scientists began to explore the possibility of de-extinction, not to reverse history, but to restore balance. Could resurrecting a species like the woolly mammoth help stabilize Arctic ecosystems by trampling shrubs and maintaining grasslands that reflect more sunlight? Could reviving lost pollinators help restore plant communities? Could genetic technology help endangered species survive a rapidly changing climate? These questions sparked both excitement and ethical debate. Some saw de-extinction as hubris, others as redemption, but all agreed that understanding the past was essential to navigating the future. As humanity worked to reshape its relationship with the planet, people also rediscovered their relationship with time. Not the time of daily schedules or monthly calendars, but deep time, the time measured in glacial cycles, orbital variations, and evolutionary change. This perspective shifted everything when people realized that their actions would influence not just their children or grandchildren, but thousands of generations into the future. The weight of responsibility became heavier. and more meaningful. Humanity began to understand that climate action was not about saving Earth. Earth would survive regardless. It was about preserving the conditions that allowed humanity to flourish. It was about honoring the long chain of ancestors who survived every hardship imaginable: the Ice Age winters, the megafaunal extinctions, the migrations, the famines, the plagues. And it was about protecting the descendants who would inherit the consequences of today's choices. As decades passed, the world saw both victories and setbacks. Some countries met their climate goals early, others fell behind. Some ecosystems rebounded, others continued to struggle. Some communities grew stronger, some suffered deeply. There was no single turning point, no miracle solution, no dramatic moment when everything changed. Instead, progress arrived gradually, like the slow return of spring after a long winter, fragile at first, then inevitable. Humanity discovered that solving climate change was not about fighting nature. It was about working with it. It was about recognizing that forests were not resources to be used but partners in survival, that oceans were not dumping grounds but the lungs of the planet, that soils were not inert matter but living ecosystems, that every species from microscopic plankton to elephants played a role in the stability of the world. This understanding, ancient to indigenous cultures but new to the modern world, reshaped how humans saw themselves. They were no longer conquerors of nature, but participants in its vast, interconnected system. And through all of this, the memory of the Ice Age remained a quiet teacher. It reminded humanity that Earth was never static, never predictable, never fully tamed. It showed that life could rise and fall in response to subtle changes in temperature, rainfall, or sunlight. It warned that even the mightiest species, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, woolly mammoths, could vanish if the world changed too quickly. And it reminded humans that they had survived because their ancestors adapted. This legacy of adaptation now defined the modern world. Cities reimagined themselves with green arteries, parks, rivers, forests woven through skyscrapers and transit lines. Farmers used smart irrigation systems that sensed soil moisture and minimized waste. Coastal communities built floating homes and amphibious infrastructure. Architects designed buildings powered entirely by sunlight and airflow. Cars became cleaner, quieter, and eventually autonomous. Power grids transformed into vast networks of renewable energy. And despite all obstacles, humanity moved, slowly, unevenly, imperfectly, toward a future powered not by extraction, but by regeneration. Yet the story was far from over. Climate change continued, reshaped by human action, yet still dangerous and unpredictable. The world would face storms, heat waves, migrations, and transformations unlike those of the past. But for the first time in centuries, humanity began to see itself not as helpless victims of climate, nor as reckless exploiters of Earth, but as caretakers of a world entrusted to them. The greatest lesson of all began to settle across cultures, institutions, and generations. The stability that enabled civilization was not guaranteed. It was earned, and it could be earned again. The story of humanity in the Holocene was not simply about survival, it was about transformation. As the world warmed, people began reshaping their surroundings in ways no other species had ever done. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities, and cities into sprawling networks of trade, culture, and power. Rivers that once carved landscapes now carried boats filled with goods and ideas. Plains once roamed by mammoths now supported fields of wheat, barley, and rice. Forests that once sheltered giant deer now sheltered human settlements. The earth, which had shaped life for billions of years, was slowly being reshaped by life in return. This shift was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. A stone tool improved, a seed planted, a dwelling built. But over thousands of years, these small innovations accumulated into something immense. Humans were no longer just another species reacting to climate, they were actively engineering their world. Agriculture fed growing populations. Domesticated animals provided labor, transport, and clothing. Clay bricks stacked into homes formed the foundations of future cities, and with stability came specialization. Some people farmed, others forged metal, others carved symbols into clay tablets, marking the birth of recorded history. Civilization emerged not as a sudden event, but as a long, winding process, shaped by both necessity and opportunity. In the Fertile Crescent, people followed the rhythms of the Tigris and Euphrates, learning when floods came and how soils replenished themselves. Along the Nile, predictable floodwaters created fertile lands, that allowed cities to flourish with mathematical precision. In the Indus Valley, urban planners designed streets aligned with wind patterns, creating natural cooling systems. In China, early dynasties harnessed the power of rivers to irrigate vast farmlands. Every region adapted uniquely to the opportunities created by the stable climate. Yet, beneath this stability, memories of the Ice Age lingered in subtle ways. People still feared hunger the way their ancestors once feared the long glacial winters. They stored grain in large silos, built defensive walls around cities, and developed rituals meant to appease gods associated with weather, fertility, and harvest. These customs were echoes of a time when survival depended on understanding nature's moods. Even as humans built monuments that touched the sky, they remained humbled by storms, droughts, and rivers that overflowed with devastating force. Trade routes expanded across continents, weaving a web of cultural and economic exchange. Amber from northern Europe made its way to Mediterranean markets. Spices traveled from South Asia to the Middle East. Gold crossed deserts on the backs of camels. Knowledge spread with every caravan and ship. Knowledge of crops, tools, writing systems, astronomy, and medicine. The world became more connected, more interdependent, more aware of itself. This global tapestry of civilizations was possible because the climate allowed predictability, something unheard of during the chaotic climate shifts of the Ice Age. But even with this stability, humans did not escape the challenges posed by nature. Droughts occasionally struck with surprising intensity. Rivers changed course, volcanoes erupted, darkening skies and cooling the planet temporarily. Civilizations rose, flourished, and sometimes collapsed under these pressures. The ruins left behind, temples overgrown by forests, abandoned cities reclaimed by sand, served as silent reminders of how vulnerable even mighty societies could be when climate shifted unexpectedly. Yet each collapse taught lessons, and from each failure, new ideas emerged. As centuries passed, humanity's population grew, and their influence expanded. Forests shrank as cities spread. Grasslands transformed into farms. Wetlands were drained for habitable land. These changes were not malicious, they were simply the unintended consequences of survival and progress. But they set the stage for something unprecedented, an era where humans began altering the planet on a geological scale. And yet, even as landscapes changed, the human imagination blossomed. People developed philosophy, religion, art, and science. They observed the stars and realized the universe was vast beyond comprehension. They built monuments and wrote epics that preserved ancestral wisdom. They studied mathematics, chemistry, astronomy, and medicine, creating knowledge that would one day help them understand the very forces that shaped the Ice Age cycles. The same curiosity that once compelled humans to follow migrating herds now pushed them to unlock the secrets of atoms, stars, and time itself. This era of learning was transformative. Scholars discovered patterns in the movement of planets. Engineers built aqueducts that defied gravity. Artisans created sculptures that captured human emotion in stone. Sailors crossed oceans guided only by celestial navigation. And through every advancement, humanity's confidence grew. They believed they had mastered nature. They believed they could predict its patterns and control its whims. They believed the stability of the Holocene would last forever. But nothing on Earth remains unchanged forever. As human societies flourished, they began burning wood, then coal, then oil. Densely stored sunlight from ancient forests buried millions of years ago. Factories multiplied, sending smoke into the sky. Cities swelled with millions of people. Transport networks stretched across continents, powered by engines fueled by carbon-rich resources. No one realized at first that this burning of fossil fuels was releasing carbon dioxide far faster than natural systems could absorb it. No one realized that by altering the composition of the atmosphere, they were nudging the climate system toward uncharted territory. Some of the first warnings came from nature itself. Winters grew slightly shorter. Glaciers retreated, plants bloomed earlier, species shifted their migration routes. At first, these changes seemed harmless, even beneficial. But slowly, the patterns became impossible to ignore. Heat waves grew more intense, storms more destructive. The Arctic began melting at a rate that astonished scientists. The oceans warmed and acidified, threatening coral reefs and fish populations. Forests burned more frequently, rivers dried in some regions and flooded in others. These were not random events, they were signals, like the early cracks in a dam. Still, not everyone believed the warning signs. Throughout history, humans had developed resilience by trusting their instincts. But the changes unfolding now were too slow for instinct, too complex for simple observation, and too large for any one person or community to grasp without science. The climate system was vast, its gears turning across millennia, and yet humanity had become the first species capable of forcing those gears to spin faster. Researchers around the world began studying ice cores, sediment layers, ancient pollen, and atmospheric samples to understand what was happening. When they finally pieced together the puzzle, the conclusion was staggering. Humans had become a geological force. The rhythm of the Ice Age cycles, once controlled solely by subtle shifts in Earth's orbit, was now being influenced by industrial activity. The world had entered a new chapter where humans were not passengers on Earth's journey, but co-pilots, adjusting trajectories without fully understanding the consequences. This realization sparked debate, fear, innovation, and determination. Some people resisted change, clinging to old habits and dismissing scientific evidence. Others embraced sustainability, investing in alternative energy and conservation. Governments issued policies, some effective, others symbolic. The global community struggled to balance economic growth with environmental responsibility. Humanity found itself at a crossroads, a place it had never been before, aware of its power yet uncertain how to wield it. But even in uncertainty, there was progress. Scientists developed renewable energy technologies more efficient than ever. Cities redesigned themselves to reduce heat and conserve resources. Farmers adopted regenerative methods that restored soil health. Students organized movements demanding climate action. Inventors created machines that pulled carbon from the air. Engineers designed floating cities to adapt to rising seas. Every corner of society began exploring solutions, and yet the scale of the challenge remained immense. Humanity was learning that the real threat was not climate change alone, it was the illusion that there was more time left than there truly was. The Earth could not negotiate. It responded only to physics, chemistry, and biology. It responded to the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, the heat in the oceans, the clarity of the skies. It responded to choices made decades earlier. The storms hitting coasts today were shaped by emissions from before many citizens were born. The heat waves of the future would be shaped by decisions made now. Despite the weight of this knowledge, people continued to hope. Hope was in their nature. They had survived ice ages, droughts, famines, and plagues. They had rebuilt after collapses. They had crossed continents, oceans, and unknown horizons. Hope drove them to imagine solutions not yet invented. It pushed them to believe that cooperation across borders was possible. It reminded them that even when the world seemed fragile, humanity had endured every challenge delivered by time. As the world moved deeper into the 21st century, humanity began to view itself through a different lens. People realized they were part of a vast story, a story that began long before the first human left footprints on wet soil, a story shaped by orbital cycles and glacial rhythms, by extinct giants and resilient ancestors. This realization softened some divisions and strengthened a sense of purpose. People understood that their inheritance was not only the technologies they built, but the climate system that nurtured them. To protect that system was to protect their own future. And so, communities across the world began focusing not just on surviving climate change, but on building societies capable of thriving in harmony with the planet. They invested in clean energy, restored ecosystems, educated children about the Earth's history, and preserved the remaining natural wonders. Slowly, humanity began to shift from a species that merely reacted to change into a species that anticipated it. By understanding the Ice Age cycles, people learned that every climate shift in history had reshaped life on Earth. Now, another shift was underway, one they had triggered themselves. This time, the outcome would not be dictated by orbital cycles, glacial advances, or melting ice sheets alone. It would be determined by human choices, actions, and imagination, and perhaps that was the greatest turning point in the story. The moment humanity realized that the future was not something that happened to them, it was something they created. The future of humanity, shaped by thousands of years of resilience, stood now on the edge of a new frontier. The world humans inherited was not the frozen expanse their ancestors once feared, nor the untouched wilderness early civilizations revered. It was a world transformed by innovation, by ambition, and by the profound ability of one species to alter the conditions of life itself. Yet even in this transformed world, the echoes of the past remained imprinted in every coastline, every rainfall pattern, every layer of soil, and every species fighting to adapt to the changes unfolding around them. As awareness grew, humanity started recognizing that the balance sustaining life was delicate. The systems regulating climate, atmospheric gases, ocean currents, forests, ice sheets worked together like interlocking gears. For millions of years, these gears operated without the influence of civilization. They moved according to cycles governed by the Earth's tilt, its orbit, the distribution of sunlight, and the chemical dance between oceans and sky. But with industrialization, humans had reached into this intricate machinery and turned the gears faster, forcing the system into unfamiliar territory. This realization did not spread overnight. It came slowly through scientific discoveries, through devastating weather events, through the collapse of ecosystems long considered stable. Coastal communities witnessed high tides creeping higher each year. Farmers saw familiar seasons behave unpredictably. Fishermen returned with fewer catches. Firefighters confronted blazes burning hotter and longer than any before. Ordinary people, even without scientific training, sensed that something fundamental was changing. Their instincts, shaped by generations of observing nature, whispered that Earth's rhythm had shifted. Yet, the story was not only about danger, it was also about awakening. For the first time in history, humanity could see its planet from space, an entire world captured in a single image. The fragile blue glow of the atmosphere, the swirling white clouds, the vast oceans reflecting sunlight. This perspective ignited a sense of unity, a feeling that every nation was part of a shared home suspended in the dark void of the cosmos. The idea that borders mattered less than the air everyone breathed began to take root. The climate crisis, immense as it was, became a reminder that human survival was intertwined. This growing consciousness helped inspire movements across the world. Young people demanded cleaner energy and sustainable policies. Scientists shared knowledge freely across nations, knowing that the laws of physics respected no political boundaries. Indigenous communities contributed centuries-old wisdom about land, fire, and water stewardship. Engineers designed technologies that captured sunlight, wind, and geothermal heat with unprecedented efficiency. Cities started transforming their infrastructure, planting urban forests, creating green roofs, and designing buildings that used a fraction of the energy once needed. Still, the path forward was not smooth. There were conflicts over resources, political resistance, economic fears, and misinformation spreading faster than scientific truth. In some regions, powerful interests clung to fossil fuels. In others, communities lacked the financial means to adapt to rising seas or shifting rainfall. Inequality deepened the challenge, exposing the vulnerable to the harshest impacts. Yet despite these obstacles, pockets of progress continued to grow, like seeds taking root in unlikely soil. Humanity found strength not in perfection, but in persistence. The same determination that once drove hunter-gatherers to cross frozen land bridges now push scientists to map atmospheric changes with extraordinary precision. The same collaborative spirit that enabled early humans to coordinate mammoth hunts now fueled international agreements. And the same curiosity that inspired cave painters to depict running animals now inspired children to imagine worlds powered entirely by clean energy. At the heart of this transformation was a simple but profound shift. People began to understand that their relationship with Earth was not one-sided. The planet provided resources, but it also required stewardship. Soil needed nourishment, rivers needed protection, forests needed time to regenerate, species needed space to thrive, even the atmosphere needed balance. This realization sparked a new era of ecological thinking, one that blended ancient wisdom with modern science. In classrooms, children learned not only mathematics and history, but also how ecosystems functioned, how carbon cycles flowed, and how climate feedback loops operated. In villages, farmers revived traditional techniques that sustained soil health. In cities, urban planners designed spaces that encouraged biodiversity. The idea that humans were separate from nature, an idea born in early industrial times, slowly faded, replaced by a deeper truth. Humans were part of nature, and nature was part of humans. As the decades unfolded, humanity encountered both setbacks and breakthroughs. There were years when emissions dipped, only to rise again. Years when coral reefs showed signs of recovery, then suffered new bleaching events.
years when renewable energy surged, followed by political
conflicts that slowed progress. But across the long arc of time, the direction shifted. Renewable energy became cheaper than fossil fuels in most regions. Electric transport became widespread. Reforestation campaigns restored degraded lands. Innovations in materials reduced waste, and young leaders, shaped by a lifetime of awareness, pushed boldly for global cooperation. Even with progress, challenges persisted. The effects of past emissions continued unfolding. Sea levels rose steadily, claiming low-lying islands and pushing coastal cities to redesign or retreat. Forest fires returned annually in some regions, requiring new strategies for prevention and response. Heat waves tested the limits of human endurance. Climate migration became a defining feature of the 21st century, as families moved not for opportunity but survival. These shifts tested humanity's compassion and ability to adapt. Yet even in hardship, people found resilience. In flood-prone areas, communities built floating homes. In drought-stricken regions, scientists developed crops capable of surviving extreme conditions. In places where coral reefs collapsed, researchers experimented with assisted evolution to help new corals survive warming waters. Innovation became intertwined with empathy. It was no longer merely about fixing problems, it was about reimagining what a sustainable future could look like. The world humanity was building would never resemble the Holocene in which civilization first blossomed. Too much had changed, but it could be a world where ecosystems recovered, where species stabilized, where children breathed clean air and drank clean water, and where the climate system settled into a new equilibrium shaped not by accident, but by intention. It could be a world where lessons of the past guided the choices of the future, and those lessons ran deep. The glacial cycles taught that Earth's climate was sensitive and could shift dramatically in relatively short periods. The Ice Age extinctions taught that species unable to adapt would vanish. The Holocene taught that human stability depended on climate stability. The agricultural revolution taught that innovation could reshape society. The industrial era taught that power without caution could destabilize the planet. Now, the modern age was teaching that knowledge brought responsibility. Humanity began to understand that the clock was still ticking, not toward another glacial advance as once feared, but toward the consequences of their own actions. The carbon already in the atmosphere ensured warmer decades ahead. The melting already underway ensured higher seas. But beyond these near-term challenges, there remained a larger, more profound question. What kind of world would future generations inherit? This question echoed across classrooms, parliaments, research labs, and kitchen tables. It inspired artists, scientists, entrepreneurs, and activists. It became a guiding principle, a moral foundation for decision making. For the first time, humanity looked not only at the next harvest, the next election, or the next generation, but at the next 1,000 years. Such long-term thinking was rare in human history. Farmers worried about seasons, empires worried about decades, civilizations worried about centuries. But now people began thinking in millennia. They thought about preserving ice sheets, restoring biodiversity, stabilizing atmospheric carbon, and ensuring that future societies would not inherit a world pushed beyond repair. They thought about their descendants the way their ancestors once thought about their hunters and gatherers, people who lived, not yet born, but whose survival depended on choices made today. Among scientists studying paleoclimate, there was a growing realization. Humanity had become the dominant force shaping Earth's climate, but it had also become the only force capable of correcting its trajectory. This dual role was unprecedented. For millions of years, the 100,000-year cycle had shaped glaciers, oceans, and climate belts without regard for life. But now, life, one species in particular, had the ability to alter the cycle itself. The future would not be a simple extension of the past. It would be a reflection of human will. And so, humanity entered a new age, an age where awareness guided action, where history informed imagination, and where global cooperation became essential. Nations that once competed for resources now collaborated on climate research. Corporations that once polluted now invested heavily in sustainability. Communities rebuilt themselves with resilience in mind. The world began to understand that progress was not the opposite of sustainability. Sustainability was a requirement for progress. As generations passed, the narrative shifted. Climate change was no longer framed only as a crisis, but as a turning point in human evolution, an opportunity to redefine civilization. Just as the end of the Ice Age pushed humans toward agriculture, the challenges of the modern era pushed humans toward ecological responsibility, technological innovation, and global unity. In the vast timeline of Earth, humanity's story was brief, but its impact profound. The Ice Age forged modern humans, the Holocene nurtured civilization, and the modern era challenged humanity to rise beyond instinct and embrace foresight. Whether the future held forests thriving, oceans recovering, and skies clearing, or whether it held scarcity, conflict, and loss, depended on choices made in the present. Yet, despite uncertainty, one truth endured. Humans had survived every challenge the planet had ever thrown at them. They adapted, learned, evolved, and rebuilt. And now, facing the greatest test of all, they carried within them the same spirit that guided their ancestors across frozen plains and through dark caves illuminated only by firelight. In the end, the question was not whether Earth would endure. It always had. The question was whether humanity would choose to become caretakers of their world or continue as unintentional disruptors, whether they would honor the lessons encoded in ice, fossils, sediments, and ancient memories, whether they would rise to the moment or let it slip away. The future was unwritten, still forming like a glacier slowly carving its path or a seed waiting to sprout after winter's end. Humanity stood at the beginning of its next chapter, holding the pen, the ink, and the power to shape the story that would define not just decades or centuries, but ages to come. And with that realization came a quiet but powerful truth. The Ice Age might be over, but humanity's age had only just begun.